everybody. It's so good to have you with me this morning. I'd just like to do a little reminder about our last time together. I wonder if you remember what our stories were about last time. That's right, they were about the star that led people to the manger to see Jesus when he was born. And the people that came from the farthest away that followed the star were the wise men. Some people call them the kings. Some people use another word for wise men called the Magi. The Bible doesn't really tell us how many kings there were, but we always think that there were three because they do describe the three gifts that the kings brought to the baby Jesus. But it doesn't really matter how many kings, and in fact, our first story is about the fourth king, which really we don't talk about a lot, but it's an adapted story, which means it's taken from a story written a long time ago called The Other Wise Man. So let's see what we have in our book today. This book is by Ted Steiger, who did both the words and the pictures. Once upon a time, 3 kings came out of a distant land and followed a star to a little town in the desert. Though you may know that the town they were visiting the wise men or the Magi, or as I did by their names, Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthazar. They brought with them gold, frankincense, and myrrh, presents for the newborn child. But there was another king who set out on the long and difficult journey. Unlike the others, he arrived too late and without any gift. I was that king, named King Magi. I was the fourth king. I was the ruler of a very small kingdom. So small that I was the only one in the whole kingdom. I was the king and the people. If it had not been for my camel, Chamberlain, is Chamberlain in the picture? No, Chamberlain isn't in the picture. I would have been all alone, except for the stars, my distant friends. See this castle over here? That's the whole town. Just room for the king and Chamberlain. Like the 3 kings, I was a stargazer. That meant that he looked up at the stars all the time, seeing if there were stories in the stars. And we know that there are stories in the stars. Night after night, I scoured the sky for the sign that would herald the birth of the King of Kings. Night after night, I searched in vain. That means he couldn't find any. How long had I watched? 1,000 nights? 10,000 nights? And then, one night it happened. A bright star shone in the east. It was the sign I had been waiting to find. My heart skipped a beat with joy. In an instant, we ran out the door, only to run back again. After all, a king had been born. We couldn't show up without a present. I put on my royal cloak and picked up my valuable possessions, the royal star map and the royal star crystal. We were on our way. And you see that Chamberlain's carrying the star crystal there and the royal star map. And of course, King Magi is wearing his robe. We had to hurry. The three kings were waiting at the edge of the desert, and the four of us would continue our journey together. See, the three kings are way over here, way across the desert from where King Massel is. We rode through the night, leaving our home far behind, but I felt safe with the star as my guide. See the star up here with the tail on the star? That's what King Massel is following. But then the wind kicked up the sand, and it stung our eyes so that we couldn't see. The wind howled and bellowed, and the sandstorm started. Afraid for our lives, we plowed on through the weather after the wave of sand, hoping to overrun the storm and find shelter, but it seemed hopeless. And then, just as we were ready to drop into the sand dunes, we staggered out of the storm into stillness. It was Chamberlain who had heard it first, a small cry on the wind. What we were ready to do, my friends were waiting, and we had such a long journey still ahead of us. What were we to do? We headed back into the storm, and there in its heart we found a little nomad girl, and stung and frightened. Nomad meant that she really didn't have one home. She wandered and wandered and wandered all her life. That would be kind of sad, don't you think? I wrapped her in my cloak and carried her through the desert. We were glad to have found her, and glad too when her family found us. They invited us to stay, but I was anxious to join my friends. We rode on, confident that we could make up the time. Yet, when we reached the desert's edge, the three kings had already gone. My dear Mademoiselle, said the note, we waited as long as we could. We have set off across the desert. One travels faster than three, so we thought that it would be certain that you would catch up with us. Your friend Balthazar. They weren't far ahead. We would surely catch up. Chamberlain galloped from them. Chamberlain galloped faster than he had ever galloped in his whole life. But Chamberlain was quite a bit smaller than most camels, and his legs, strong as they were, weren't very long. At last, I spied the kings in the distance. See them way over here? But see them following the star still? Only it wasn't them. It was a merchant caravan, lost and without a map. Look how big that caravan is. Wow, it was all the way around and around all the sand dunes and behind these sand dunes and all the way out of the picture. We weren't the only ones traveling that night. Could I help them, perhaps? But such a long camel train would travel very slowly, and we were already late. What were we to do? In slow procession, we led the caravan safely out of the desert. We would soon reach the merchant's town. I looked up and my heart soared. Meet up with which the kings not too far away. See, they're over there. There's the star. But the deep gorge, a gorge is a big gully. A gully means it's a big dip, like between mountains or between big hills. Sometimes it can be very dangerous. A deep gorge ran across our path. There was no way around it. We would have to cross over. The merchants were scared. The camels were scared. I was scared. But Chamberlain was with me, and his courage helped us all. Look at how long it went. Oh my heavens. All the way over there. See, Chamberlain is over there. How were we all to make it? We'll never know. At the outskirts of their town, we bade farewell to the merchants so they wouldn't get lost again. We left the royal map with the merchants so they could set off and follow their trail. The night was cool and silent, and the star glimmered in a faraway window. The night was cold. We rode on until we were too tired to go any further. But it was Chamberlain who heard it first. A tiny tinkling bell in the breeze. We looked around, but there was no one there. What were we to do? The tinkling came again. Ring, 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 ring. Then I noticed a small plant. You see the small plant there? Withered and thirsty. I gave it the rest of the water that we had. To our amazement, the plant began to flower, then dropped a little round fruit right into the palm of my hand. We were shocked and not a little puzzled, but the star was calling and I was anxious to join my friends and go. We traveled on following the star into the mountains. The road grew steeper and the wind grew icy. It started to rain, and the raindrops turned to hailstones, but Chamberlain didn't seem to mind. I stayed close to him, afraid that we would lose sight of each other. Finally, we climbed above the clouds and found ourselves on the top of a mountain. There are two different peaks. The star burned brightly, full of hope once more. We tumbled after our friends. We soon reached a valley. It sure would be, surely we would catch up with the kings now. But now we found our path blocked by a strange wall that went on and on and on. We couldn't find a door or a window anywhere, even there is one up there. There was no way through it. We would have to go around it. We hurried by as quickly as we could, unsure of what was around the corner. We were almost past when we discovered the terrible truth. The wall was being built by children. The children were slaves belonging to a rich man who forced them to work on his wall. The guards seized my camel and me and carried us inside. I commanded the rich man to let the children go, but he just laughed. I offered to give up my last gift for the newborn king in exchange for the children's freedom. The rich man snatched the crystal and said that it was enough for me and my camel to leave. We were free to go, but no one else. What were we to do? Does he look like a nice man? I don't think he does, but let's wait and see. Their children are building the family. We stayed with the children and worked and worked and worked with them to finish the wall. As we worked, the stones piled higher and higher and hid the star from our eyes. And in spite of Chamberlain's best efforts to keep me from despair, my hopes were fading away. Seeing my sadness, a little girl gave me her only possession, a tiny lamb carved with wood. I hid the lamb in my tunic and promised her that somehow we would all be free. But not yet. Instead, the guards hurtled us all in some dark maze. A maze is like a puzzle in the land that people build, and there usually is an end, but it's very hard to find. You have to go back and forth and around, and it's really puzzling. We could hardly see each other in the blackness, and the children huddled close to me and Chamberlain. How would we ever escape? It was Chamberlain who heard it first, a tiny tinkling bell. Remember that? The fruit from the desert. It cracked open in my hand to reveal 3 softly luminous, that means bright, star seeds. The light shone in the darkness as Chamberlain led us through the maze. Then on tiptoe, we passed the sleeping guards and out of the prison. We lifted the children to a small opening in the wall. We were free. The children came with us. I felt sure that they would be safe with the newborn king. The star led us toward a little town called Bethlehem. There we met many shepherds with glad tidings. Glad tidings means good news. They had followed the star to a stable at the edge of the town where they had visited a baby and the 3 kings. My heart sang with joy, but the shepherds stopped us. Something terrible is happening in Bethlehem. The soldiers sent to kill the King of Kings were killing all the little children in the town. I thought of my little baby, born in a stable. I had to save him. We left the children with the shepherds and went down the hillside, but soldiers were searching the valley, so we hid among the ruins until they passed. Then, one out of the shadows, a man leading a donkey came by, and the lady on the donkey had a small baby. They looked very frightened. The baby was starting to cry, so I beckoned them to the king's hiding place. Not a moment too soon, we sat silently as the soldiers passed by, except for the newborn child who started to whimper. Whimper means to cry a little bit. Quickly, I gave him the wooden lamp from my pocket, and he beamed with hushed delight. But the soldiers had turned back and were coming closer. What were we to do? They were sure to discover us. What were we to do? There was only one thing to do. With a deep breath, I leapt out onto the road, Chamberlain at my side, and ran, hoping we could distract the soldiers so that the family could make it away safely. Sure enough, The soldiers gave chase after us, and they were soon gaining on us. Somehow drew the pursuers away so that before I stumbled to a stop. Exhausted, Chamberlain stood guard as the troops closed in, their swords drawn menacingly. That means very meaningful. We were outnumbered, and it seemed out of luck. To this day, I don't know what happened next. The earth shook, and our ears were full of thunder, and the soldiers, they were very afraid and fled in confusion. I cannot be certain, but I like to think that they had been scattered by the stampeding of the 3 camels. Chamberlain and I stood alone on the edge of the town. The stable that the shepherds had spoken about was up ahead. We ran as fast as we could, but the stable was empty. We were too late. Our journey had been in vain. I fell on my knees and cried. And then, the depths of the desert, the most wonderful thing happened. I heard a voice speak softly. King Mazel, you have not come too late. You were always with me. When I was lost, you showed me the way. Do you remember that happening? When I was thirsty, you gave me water. Do you remember that happening? When I was captive, you set me free. When I was in danger, you saved me. You were always there when I needed you, and I will be with you forever. And you see this big smile on Chamberlain's face? Do you think maybe Chamberlain was thinking those words? But if he was, who put those words in his head? Hearing these words, I knew that my journey was over. My heart was filled with joy. The rising sun felt warm on my face. A new day was dawning. Outside the stable, the shepherds and the children were waiting full of smiles. We embraced and set off into the countryside. You see that the shepherds have quite a few sheep, as you can see in that picture. And so, although it hardly matters now, I never did meet the 3 kings, Balthasar, Caspar, and Melchior, returned to their kingdoms, but I did not. I am no longer a king. I am a shepherd, and Chamberlain is a sheep camel. He looks after the sheep, and I look after the flock of children. We are very happy. From time to time, we still like to walk in the meadow and watch the big sky. And though the star has long disappeared from its place, it still burns brightly in my heart. You think maybe he found his baby Jesus maybe in his heart? So that's the story of the 4th king, which is a very interesting story that we like to tell. Now, remember I said that we don't know that there were 3 kings. There might have been 4 kings, there might have been more. But my second story is that one called Home by Another Way. And it is about the 3 kings. And it is by Barbara Brown Taylor, who is a very well-known writer in the Christian church. This is from the Bible, from the book of Matthew, from chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay homage." That means to come to honor him. Once upon a time there were 3 very wise men who were all sitting in their own countries, minding their own business, when a bright star lodged into the right eye of each one of them. Can you think about a star being in your eye? That sounds a little odd, doesn't it? The star was bright so that none of them could tell whether it was really burning in the star, in the sky, or in their own imaginations. But they were wise enough to know it did not matter all that much. And it was a tug that they had been waiting for all their lives. That means it was pulling them. It was calling them to come. Each in his own country had tried books, magic, and astrology. Remember in the 4th King we talked about stargazing? Well, that's what astrology is. One had lived on nothing but dried herbs, boiled in water. See how thin and skinny he looks? Oh my goodness. Another man spent his entire fortune learning how to read and write in an ancient language. The third one was walking on hot coals. Ooh, that doesn't sound very comfortable. Though it did nothing for him beyond the great sense of relief when he got off of them. Despite their best efforts, all 3 of them still felt something was missing. They were all glad for a reason to get out of town, which was clearly where the star was coming from. Out away from everything they knew how to manage and survive. Out from under their reputations. That means how people that they knew thought about them. That they had built for themselves. The high expectations. That means what they wanted to find out in life. And the disappointing fact that they didn't find what they wanted. And so they set out, one by one, each believing that he was the only one with a star in his eye, until they all ran into one another on the road to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the big city in the country. That's where the king lived. From a distance, each thought the other a mirage. That means that it appeared like a mystery, like a ghost sort of like. At first, in a twinkling reflection made of vapor and heat. But as they drew near to one another, they saw the star that they had in common. Like a tattoo or a secret handshake, something that made the brothers before they spoke. They all believed that the star was leading them to Jerusalem. This made perfect sense because they had every reason to believe they were on their way to meet a king. They had no trouble gaining entrance to the palace. They looked rich, and that was enough to get them a royal audience. But the king they met was something of a disappointment. He was lumpy and rumpled and had terrible breath. His skin looked excuse me. His skin looked a funny orange color and sickly, as if he had gotten the best of him. The guards on either side of him shook with fear of their king so much that their spears rattled against their shields. Without even comparing notes, the wise men knew he was not the king that they were seeking. "Do you know of any other kings in the general area?" they asked him. "Doesn't he look mean? Now he really looks mean. He had been picking his fingernails until then, letting them know that he was bored. But their question got his attention. He looked right at them for the first time. That was when he saw the star in each of their eyes. His own eyes grew perfectly round, like the eyes of a snake. The king asked the wise men if they would please excuse him for a moment. Then he stepped into his private chapel to talk with his clergy, that's his men in the church that worked for him. They whipped out their reference books, which smelled of mold, and told the king what he wanted to know. Yes, they said, there was something in the book of Micah about a new ruler for Israel, but nothing to get excited about. It was a short story. It had been there for years and years and years, and so long that it was unlikely the men in the other room were fulfilling that prophecy. But sure, why not? Send the wise men to Bethlehem to check it out, to save the king a little money instead of doing his own research. So, that is what the king did. He gargled, combed his hair, and went back to tell the wise men they should go to Bethlehem at once with his blessing. And on one caution, that they come back and tell him about the king, so that he could go and worship him too. What would he do? He knew he would send the king flowers. His breath smelled like pine sol. That's what your mommies used to clean the floors sometimes. So when he said it, which made the wise men feel very sick to their stomachs, they knew something was not right. But once they were back out in the night air, they could see the star in the sky again, and it set their minds at rest. They followed it right to the doorway of a one-room house in Bethlehem. It was a perfectly nice house, but small, well built, but not the kind of place that they'd expected to find a king in. A dog was sniffing a woodpile under the eaves at the edge of the roof, in hopes of finding a mouse. Someone was practicing the lute. The lute is a musical instrument from a long time ago. Next door, going over the same notes over and over again. The smell of dinner was still in the air. Wheat cakes cooked on a griddle. Wheat cakes are what we call pancakes. And then in sheep's fat, lentils with lots of garlic and rice. The place looked so simple they might never have chosen it themselves. But since the star had chosen it for them, they knocked on the door. When it opened, a couple was standing almost dread with fright. Not that the wise men noticed. With their arms full of gifts, they crowded into the small space, bumping their turbans on the rafters and snagging their robes on the rough wood. All they could see was the baby, who was not afraid and whose right eye was shining with the same star they had seen before they had left home. It was him, whoever he was. They did not have a clue, but they knew what to do. They got down on their knees and bowed their heads. So what were they going to do? Say a prayer, maybe? Maybe thank God that they were found the babe? Then they gave him the things they had brought with him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. All the wrong things they could see now, things that a baby had no use for. They should have brought him goat's milk, a warm blanket, and something shining to hang above the crib. But how could they have known? The child's parents were gracious. That means that they were very kind to the strangers. They thanked them for their expensive gifts and held them up for the baby to see. Then, to the wise men's complete surprise, the child's mother picked him up and handed him around to each of them to hold, damp and soft and living weight in their arms. When they had finished admiring him, she took the baby back, nursed him, and put him to bed. Then, before the light coming through the window of the house had entirely gone out, the three wise men fell asleep right where they sat. In the morning, when they awoke, the wise men could not find their stars anywhere. They searched each other's eyes, but the stars were gone. Frantically, they looked at all the corners and under the chairs, and the baby's mother even shook out his blankets. But still, no stars. Soon the wise men calmed down and said, "Never mind, we do not need them anymore." For they had found what they were looking for, something they could not lose. As much as they hated to, they added, they had better be on their way. They would not be passing back through Jerusalem, they said. All of them had the same dream, that when they woke up, said that they were not to go to Jerusalem. If any knew anything at all, they would be here instead of there. Besides, none of the wise men's old maps worked anymore. They would have to find a new way home. So the wise men picked up their packs, which were lighter than they were before because they'd given the gifts away, and they stood up in front of the baby to thank him for the gifts that he had given them. "What in the world are you talking about?" the baby's mother said, laughing. "For all the scent and weight and the skin of a baby," said the first wise man, who had no interest in living herbs anymore. "For the home and the love here," said the second wise man, who could not remember how to speak the ancient language. "For a really great story," said the third wise man, who thought that telling it might do a lot more for him than walking on hot coals. And the wise man walked outside, stretched, kissed the baby goodbye, and went home by another way. And that's my stories for today. We've taken a lot of time. I'm not sure we have time for a prayer. But you are in your own homes, and I know that you can bow your heads and say a prayer that thanks the wise men and the star for leading them to the baby Jesus. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Bye.